Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, happy Friday, happy Saturday. I don't know when you're watching this, but I do know that you're here to do the biomolecules on the menu virtual lab that we did before the break. So please go ahead and pull out your document. I'll wait. All right. So we are working on biomolecules on the menu. It looks like this. And we're going to start with part one. I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as possible to not make this video extremely long. So if I'm going through a question too fast, you can pause and read the answer. I'm going to be showing all the answers on screen as well as going through the lab itself. All right. So food labels provide information about what's in your food. In this activity, you will interpret the information in food labels. You'll then connect that information to how your body uses the molecules in food for energy and to build your cells. Understanding these concepts can help you make decisions about what to eat daily. Let's start with which food. So, a school athlete has a big sporting event coming up in 2 weeks. They have two choices for lunch: spaghetti or steak. So figure one shows a drawing of a plain bowl of spaghetti and a plate of a plain piece of beef steak. So what are some similarities and differences between the foods? Well, they're both food, right? So they both contain calories and biomolecules, but you might know that steak, it comes from an animal, the muscle of a cow, in fact. And so it's made mostly of protein, right? Because our muscles are made mostly of protein. While spaghetti comes from wheat, comes from plants. So it's made primarily of carbohydrates. So the steak is mainly protein and fats, while the spaghetti is mainly carbs. And the steak may help keep you fuller for longer because it may be harder for your body to digest those complex molecules, the proteins and the fats. And as some students suggested when we did this in class, it'd be better if we combined the steak and spaghetti into some sort of a dish instead of eating them both plain as they're depicted in these pictures. So, you could write a lot of different answers for question number one. And for question number two as well, there could be a lot of different answers. So, the athlete wants to choose foods that will help them build their muscle mass as they exercise and train for the upcoming event, provide energy so that they can prepare for and perform well at the event. So, what questions might they ask to decide whether eating or spaghetti or steak best meets their needs? So, which food may help me build more muscle? So, which food contains more protein? Which food may provide me more energy? Which food has more calories? Which food will take longer to digest? Which food will help me build uh, stores of energy so that I'm ready to go on the day of the race? So, those are some options, some other options here. Which one will provide me with more energy right now? Which food will help me build muscle in the 2 weeks leading up to the race? Will eating more steak help me build more muscle mass? Which food will help me fill up more? Which food will allow me to gain both muscle and energy? Right, so you could write your own questions here, but I want to see at least 3 questions for this number two. All right, so now we're going to look at the food labels for the spaghetti and the steak. Food labels provide the amount of energy for a single serving of food. They also list the major energy providing biomolecules and other ingredients in the food. So we're going to compare the spaghetti and the steak. So it asks here, based on the food labels, what are the main similarities and differences between the two foods? So let's go through that looking at the food label. We have here, first of all, the ingredients. Steak is beef, processed minimally at the meat processing plant or the farm, depending on how close you get your meat from the source, but it's minimally processed whole food coming from an animal. Whereas spaghetti is going to be more processed carbohydrate coming from wheat, semolina wheat, and durum wheat flour are the ingredients. So the sources of the food are different in that way, animal versus plant. But we can see the calories are roughly the same, 200 calories and 2 ounces of spaghetti. But for 4 ounces of steak, you get about the same amount of calories, 220 calories. So let's compare the fat content. For those 200 calories, you get 1 gram of fat in the spaghetti, where you get 16 grams of fat in the steak. 4 grams of that fat are saturated fats, which are going to be the fats that are solid at room temperature, like butter. And trans fats are also not healthy for the body. And so you'll see those listed on menus as well. Trans fats you can find in a lot of artificially created oils like margarine, for example, which used to be considered a healthier alternative to butter. But hydrogenated soybean oil and other corn oils contain these trans fats, and they're not considered healthy for animals. But some of our food contains trans fats. In this case, neither food has any. Cholesterol, again, another type of fat that we need some of this fat, but too much can be very dangerous for our bodies. It can build up in the arteries and cause blockages. And steak is a food that is well known for its role in blocking the arteries. But eating too much sweet food, dessert, sugary beverages like soda has been shown to be just as bad for the arteries as too much beef, as the modern diet has demonstrated. But we can see here if cholesterol is what you're concerned about, don't eat steak because we've got 70 milligrams of cholesterol, but 0 milligrams of cholesterol in the spaghetti. All right, let's compare the carbohydrate content. 0 grams of carbohydrates in the steak, while there's 42 grams of carbohydrates in the spaghetti. We've got 3 grams of dietary fiber in the spaghetti. So, dietary fiber is typically cellulose, but what it is a carbohydrate that is unable to be broken down, but it is able to travel through the digestive system, and that dietary fiber remains mostly whole in the large intestine, as we'll talk about a little bit later, and it helps us digest and void our waste. So dietary fiber is a good thing. There's no dietary fiber in steak. You may know that steak is not very good for digestion. Eating a lot of red meat is now linked to colon cancer, unfortunately. So finally, looking at the protein content, we can see the spaghetti is almost all of the calories from carbohydrates, but there are 7 grams of protein in the spaghetti, while the steak has more than twice the amount of protein, with 20 grams of protein in the steak. So most of the calories in the steak are coming from fat and protein, while the calories in the spaghetti are coming from mostly the carbohydrates. But the spaghetti is more balanced. You can see the spaghetti has fat, carbohydrates, and protein, while the steak is mostly fat and protein. All right, so those are the food labels. This is the similarities and differences that we just broke down. About the same number of calories, but they come from different sources. Both contain protein, but the steak has more than double the protein of the spaghetti. Only the spaghetti contains carbohydrates. Only the steak contains cholesterol. And the steak has more protein, fat, and sodium than the spaghetti. All right. Why do you think there are differences between the nutritional content of these two foods? Again, we looked at the ingredient list, and that's why the spaghetti is a plant-based food coming from wheat flour, and it is highly processed. It literally comes from a factory typically, while the steak comes from the muscle tissue of an animal. It's more of a whole food that remains mostly unprocessed on its way to the dinner plate. So we're going to be getting different nutritional content because one's a plant and one's an animal. All right. Which food do you think would provide more energy? How about which food do you think would be better for building muscle? So, both foods have about the same number of calories, so they would provide about equal energy. But the spaghetti would provide energy more quickly due to the carbohydrate content. The body would be able to use that energy more quickly than the energy from steak, which comes from fats and proteins, which must be broken down further before they can be used to produce energy by the body. The steak would be better for building muscle due to protein content. All right. So again, our muscles are made out of protein. So, eating foods that are high in protein helps you get those gains, bro. That's why people that are really interested in building muscle, they eat things like protein powder, right? But you may be aware that people that are really into building muscle also eat a lot of meat, and that is because meat is typically very high in protein. All right. Does the information on these food labels answer some of the questions you listed in your answer to question number two? So for this one, you're just looking at the questions that you wrote, which most of them should have been about like which food is going to help me get more energy, which food is going to help me build more muscle. And those questions were answered by the nutritional labels, right? So more energy, that's kind of going to be from the spaghetti because it has more carbohydrates, but then again, they have roughly the same calories. And which one is going to be better for building muscle? Definitely the steak because of that protein content. So you're answering those questions here. In my case, for the questions, the steak will help him build more muscle mass in the 2 weeks leading up to the competition due to the higher protein content. But both foods have roughly the same number of calories, so equal energy content. But like I said, the carbohydrates in that spaghetti, they're more easily used energy, more quickly available. So that might be better to eat on the day of the event as opposed to in the weeks leading up to it. And we'll talk more about that at the end of the lab. All right. And finally, once the athlete eats the spaghetti or steak, what happens to the biomolecules in the food? They are digested and then they're absorbed. And then they're picked up by the bloodstream and transported to cells for use in cellular respiration, where we make ATP and out comes CO2, H2O, and heat. Yay. Okay. Now let's move on to the actual lab, shall we? I know you're as excited as I am. So here we are. The link to this is on your document. I'm going to be going through the whole thing on my end, but you may want to review it on your own. So the link is on the document. It's also on the Google Classroom assignment. So biomolecules on the menu. You need food to build your cells and fuel your activities. How does the food you eat provide the energy you need? Take a bite and find out. All right, how is food digested? Overview. When you eat, your digestive system breaks down your food through a process called digestion. Digestion breaks large food molecules, such as fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, into molecules small enough, that's the key. Digestion is breaking down large molecules into their smaller parts because in order for those molecules to be able to cross into the bloodstream and cross into the cells, they need to be small enough to diffuse and be absorbed. The small versions of these large molecules are what we call nutrients. The bloodstream delivers these nutrients to your cells, along with oxygen from the air you breathe, which we can see here in the diagram. Your cells use oxygen to convert the chemical energy and nutrients into energy that cells can use for their activities. In this process, cells also generate carbon dioxide, heat, and water. So, in the presence of oxygen, aerobic respiration can occur. And that's what aerobic means. Cellular respiration is aerobic respiration. Like aerobic exercise, where you might be breathing heavily, aerobic respiration involves a lot of oxygen. And so, in the presence of oxygen, when you breathe in and the glucose and the oxygen are able to enter the mitochondria of your cells, this chemical reaction, cellular respiration, occurs, and that ATP, that usable energy, is created. And carbon dioxide, heat, and water are the waste byproducts generated. So we can see the heat being released by the body, the H2O coming out in the air that we breathe as water vapor, as well as some of it being used by our cells, and the carbon dioxide coming out when we exhale. We can also see the digestive system laid out for us, starting at the mouth. We can see the heart and the lungs there, important for our general survival, and also the cardiovascular system. But we're focusing here on the mouth, the esophagus, the liver, the stomach, the large intestine, and the small intestine. And you can't see the pancreas, but we're going to talk about the pancreas as well. All right, so this little model of a guy is eating a sandwich here. that contains fats represented by the yellow square, carbohydrates represented by the blue triangle, and proteins represented by the purple parallelogram. And the bread makes up the carbohydrates, but vegetables and fruits are also made up of carbohydrates. So, more carbohydrates in the lettuce and in the tomato, as well as fats and proteins in the meat. And I don't see any cheese on there, but you might have cheese on a sandwich like that, and that would be mostly a source of fats. All right. So now let's look at the questions. So, why does your body need to digest food? So, remember, we said large molecules need to be broken down so that they are small enough to enter the cells. So, the foods we eat are large and need to be broken down into smaller parts so that the nutrients in food can enter our cells. Digestion breaks large food molecules, such as fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, into molecules small enough to be absorbed into the bloodstream. These smaller molecules are nutrients. And question number 9 has us fill in the table to show which biomolecule is represented by each symbol. Yellow square fats, blue triangle carbohydrates, purple parallelogram protein. That's alliteration. All right, now we're going to go to the mouth. And question number 10, if the athlete eats the spaghetti or steak, what happens to the food in their mouth? All right, so digestion begins when food enters the mouth. The teeth chew the food into smaller pieces, and this is an example of mechanical digestion. We also use the tongue to move the food to the back of the throat when we swallow. That's also part of the mechanical transportation of the food. But there's also chemical digestion happening in the mouth. We have salivary glands that produce saliva and enzymes that enter the mouth when we're preparing to eat or when we're chewing our food. And this saliva mixes with the food and breaks it down with enzymes like amylase. And this is an example of chemical digestion happening in the mouth. So we've got mechanical and chemical digestion happening in the mouth. And on average, we spend less than 1 minute chewing our food. But, chewing your food is good. Always chewing your food for longer is better. It helps the rest of the digestive process, right? You're really kicking it off there in the mouth. So, as much chewing as you can do for your food helps it get smoothly digested in the rest of your digestive system. So, the athlete will chew the food in their mouth, spaghetti or steak, until it is ready to swallow. As their teeth break the food down mechanically, saliva and enzymes assist by beginning the process of chemical digestion. As saliva and enzymes mix with the food, it takes a cylindrical form. This takes approximately 1 minute. And that cylindrical form that wasn't written in the lab, but I mentioned in class, is called a bolus. And I just think that that is a funny word. And it personally helps me remember chemical and mechanical digestion because I just think it sounds funny that we're swallowing a bolus. All right. So, what are the two types of digestion that occur in the mouth? Mechanical and chemical digestion, chewing, and enzymes and saliva. So now we're going to look at the esophagus and the stomach, but I'm going to do this one in the opposite order. We're going to look at this question first because I think this one was really confusing to a lot of people because of these diagrams, and these diagrams are not in the interactive. They're just on the page. So the athlete decides to eat the spaghetti. The following illustrations represent what happens to the spaghetti in their stomach. So the first picture is going to be the picture of mostly the spaghetti chunks. So the chewed spaghetti chunks are in picture C, right? That's all we're looking at, like those yellow balls. That's the chewed chunks of spaghetti. So then next up, we're looking for mostly chewed up chunks of spaghetti now in the stomach, but we're starting to see digestion break that spaghetti down into the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins that it is made out of. So that's going to be picture D. So that's the partially digested spaghetti chunks, plus now some nutrients, including carbohydrates and proteins, you can see in the image. Next up, we're going to have A. So A, you can see there's still a little spaghetti visible, but now we've got the mostly digested spaghetti chunks and the nutrients, including the carbohydrates, proteins, and some fats, are visible. And then finally, B, where you can see the spaghetti now is mostly gone. It's not recognizable at food at this point when the food that we've eaten leaves the stomach. It's no longer going to look like what it looked like when it went into our mouths. So this is after digestion when only nutrients are left. So we have here, because it's spaghetti, mostly carbohydrates, some protein, and a small amount of fat. So now let's take a look at the esophagus and stomach. So, food is not getting digested in the esophagus. The esophagus is instead doing muscular contractions called peristalsis that transports the food after it's been swallowed to the stomach. So, the esophagus transports the food. So, pieces of food from the mouth move down the esophagus, and the esophagus does not break down food. It just brings the food to the next part of the digestive system. It is a train, a subway, a transit station for the food, and food only spends 5 to 10 seconds in the esophagus. And if it spends longer than that in the esophagus, you might be choking. So now, how about the stomach? So the stomach is the real workhorse of digestion, and this is where the food is broken down primarily, and it happens in several ways. So, first, the cells lining the stomach produce acid, mucus, and enzymes that help digest food. This is an example of chemical digestion. So, the acid, the mucus that lines the stomach, and the enzymes that are produced both in the stomach and in the pancreas and liver help digest food chemically and break it down in the stomach, as well as the stomach muscles squeezing and churning the food to mix it with the substances above. This is an example of mechanical digestion. So the stomach churns the food, which helps that acidic environment and all those enzymes break those larger molecules down into their smaller constituent parts. So, like I mentioned, the food that you swallowed, which would still mostly look like food, just chewed up food, now is going to take on a completely different appearance because it's been chemically changed at this point, reacting with acids and enzymes. So, on average, food is going to spend 2 to 6 hours being broken down in the stomach. The food is broken down into large molecules such as fats, carbohydrates, and proteins before it passes through the pyloric sphincter onto the small intestine. All right, so how is food digested? The small intestine is where most chemical digestion takes place. The enzymes and other substances help break down large food molecules into molecules small enough to be absorbed into the bloodstream. So you can see here, this is where the nutrients enter the bloodstream. The workhorse of digestion of the breakdown of food is the stomach. So once the food has entered the small intestine, like I mentioned, it's no longer recognizable as food, but the job is not done. Those monosaccharides, fatty acids, and amino acids need to be as small as possible so that they can cross into the bloodstream and be absorbed in the small intestine. So the carbohydrates coming from the stomach are broken down into their smallest parts, those monosaccharides. The fats are broken down into fatty acids, and the proteins are broken down into amino acids. These smaller molecules are nutrients, and the bloodstream delivers these nutrients to cells, which can use the nutrients for energy or to build new cell parts in the case of those amino acids, which may be used to build enzymes or cell parts, muscles, or anything else that is made out of proteins in the body. On average, food molecules spend 5 to 6 hours in the small intestine while food is being absorbed. The nutrients, rather, from the food are being absorbed. All right, so going back a little bit, how would the illustrations be similar or different for steak? So the chewed up chunks might look a little different of steak, right? But also, the spaghetti was made up of mostly carbohydrates, whereas the steak is going to be made up of mostly protein and fat. So the illustrations for the steak would be similar. The digestive process would be pretty much the same, but the nutrient breakdown would have no carbohydrates and much more protein and fat in the final image. And the steak may also take longer to digest because those molecules are harder to break down. So now we're in the small intestine. The illustrations below represent what happens to the spaghetti in the athlete's small intestine. Using the letters A through D, list the order of the illustrations from when the biomolecules in the spaghetti first enter the small intestine to when they leave. So they're going to start large. When food enters the stomach, it's food. When it leaves the stomach, now we've got fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. Once it leaves the small intestine and is being absorbed, we've got the monomers only, monosaccharides, fatty acids, and amino acids. So we're starting with the largest whole parts and we're going to end with the smallest parts. So image B, we have the mostly complete triangles, parallelograms, and squares. Then image C, getting a little bit smaller now. You can see some of the monomers peeking out. Image A, even more monomers emerge. And then image D, finally everything has been broken down. It's ready to be absorbed into the bloodstream. All right, what are the main molecules present in the small intestine when the athlete eats the spaghetti? Monosaccharides, fatty acids, and amino acids. Mainly monosaccharides, but you can see there are fatty acids and amino acids present as well. It's because that 1 gram of fat and those 7 grams of protein in the spaghetti. How would that list be different for steak? The steak did not contain monosaccharides. Instead, the contents of the small intestine would be only amino acids and fatty acids. Sugar is another word for monosaccharide. Which food, spaghetti or steak, would be broken down to sugar in the small intestine? That would be spaghetti because it's made of carbs, and carbs are polysaccharides, disaccharides, and monosaccharides. Carbs are sugars. Complex and simple. All right, now we're on to the accessory organs, the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. So, how is food digested? Pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. Two organs, the pancreas and the liver, produce substances that help break down food in the small intestine. These substances include enzymes, bile, which can be stored in the gallbladder, and buffers. So these enzymes, buffers, and bile move to the small intestine and the stomach and help in the breakdown of food. They assist in chemical digestion. So, looking at our question here, if someone experiences liver failure, their liver is not working, what would happen to digestion in their small intestine? Well, digestion in the small intestine would slow due to the lack of enzymes, bile, and buffers, which are produced in the liver. So, the liver produces enzymes, buffers, and bile that aid in chemical digestion of the small intestine. A person with liver failure would not be able to completely chemically digest their food, and as a result, they would miss out on absorbing all the nutrients from their food. Chemical digestion would not be as quick or efficient. One of the many reasons why you need to keep your liver healthy. It's the largest organ in your body besides the skin, and they call it the liver for a reason. Without it, you're all right. Go to the large intestine now by selecting the next button. Let's do it. All right, and you can see now what we've eaten doesn't look like food anymore at all. Once the nutrients have been absorbed in the small intestine, all that's left over is waste. So, food molecules that are not fully broken down, such as fiber, which remember we said is indigestible, move from the small intestine into the large intestine. Some of these undigested food molecules are eaten by commensal bacteria, and these are not bad bacteria. This is part of your gut microbiome, which you may have heard of. So, these are the good bacteria that assist in the breakdown of foods that we have on the surface of our skin, our body's microbiome, microflora. They are all over. And this is a somewhat recent discovery in science. So the importance of all of these bacteria, we're just starting to discover. So, other undigested food molecules mix with substances to form feces. Feces move through the large intestine and are eliminated from the body. On average, undigested food molecules spend 12 hours to several days in the large intestine, right? So, once the waste has entered the large intestine, between 12 hours to several days, it is voided from the body. Uh, so, let's take a look. Explain why eating the spaghetti would produce bulkier feces, i.e., more poop than eating the steak. So, we said in the large intestine, what actually gets to the large intestine. Well, everything else has been mostly absorbed, but some things are undigestible, like fiber. There wasn't any fiber in the steak, but there is fiber in the spaghetti. So the spaghetti is going to produce bulkier feces because it contains fiber. And that can be a good thing for our digestion. That fiber helps clean out the small intestine and the large intestine as it travels through the digestive tract and helps keep it nice and clean and healthy. So eating fiber is a good thing, and that's one thing that the American diet is severely lacking in is fiber. So eating fresh fruits and vegetables will provide you with a lot of fiber. Even spaghetti, which is a processed and cooked plant product, contains fiber. So eat celery. It's good for you. All right, once food is digested, the resulting nutrients can get into cells. To find out how, select the next button or go to how nutrients get into cells section. So, this part, like getting to this part, seemed to confuse some people. So, what other molecule does the bloodstream deliver to cells so that they can convert the energy in nutrients into usable energy, i.e., ATP? So, cellular respiration happens in the presence of oxygen. How do we get there? How do nutrients get into our cells? Bang, here we are. So, in the small intestine, food molecules are broken down into three types of nutrients: monosaccharides, fatty acids, and amino acids. These nutrients must be delivered to cells so that the cells can use them for energy. So, nutrients like monosaccharides, fatty acids, and amino acids are small enough to be absorbed from the small intestine into the bloodstream. The bloodstream delivers the nutrients along with oxygen from the lungs to the cells throughout the body. So, oxygen enters the bloodstream after it's been inhaled at the lungs, and then the heart pumps that oxygenated blood throughout the body. That oxygenated blood travels to the small intestine where it picks up nutrients that are then transported throughout the body and travel to the cells where those nutrients enter the cells and are used for the process of cellular respiration. All right, as cells produce ATP, they also form the following byproducts: carbon dioxide, water, and heat. What happens to each of these byproducts? So nutrients go in, monosaccharides, fatty acids, and amino acids, and oxygen enter cells from the bloodstream. Once inside the cells, they are used to produce ATP in a series of reactions called cellular respiration. Many nutrients are also used to build cellular structures or other molecules like enzymes, which are made of amino acids because enzymes are proteins. So the nutrients and the oxygen go in, but then after the chemical reaction occurs, the byproducts have to come out. So cellular respiration produces ATP, energy, but there are also waste byproducts produced, which include carbon dioxide, water, and heat. And carbon dioxide is the big one that needs to be released because this is a gas that can be harmful if it builds up in the human body. So CO2 typically enters the bloodstream and is transported to the lungs and leaves the body when you breathe out. I just released some CO2. So now we still have water and heat. Some of that water and heat can be released in your breath. If you've ever, uh, exhaled on a glass or a mirror, you can see the steam in your breath. It's hot and moist, but some of the water is used in our cells or as a part of our bodily fluids, while some leaves the body through sweat, urine, feces, or as water vapor in your breath. Heat is used to help maintain the body's temperature, but most heat leaves the body. We release heat all the time. So, carbon dioxide is carried by the blood to the lungs to be exhaled out of the body as a part of the respiratory system. Water is released by the body as body heat, and some excess water and heat are used by the body. All right, now, in between meals, cells do not receive any nutrients from food, so they use energy-rich molecules stored in the body, which main storage molecule would be produced from eating spaghetti. So spaghetti is mostly carbohydrates. So we can see here, carbohydrates have a storage molecule called glycogen. So the storage molecule that would be produced from eating a lot of carbohydrates would be glycogen. We're almost done. All right, which main storage molecule would be produced from eating steak? So steak is made up of primarily protein and fat. So we would have proteins produced, which might include, muscles. Or other body structures. But because protein makes up so much of our actual body tissues, it's not as much a storage molecule as an actual structural and functional component of the body. So, when you eat the steak, how does that excess energy get stored? As triglycerides. And you don't want to have high triglycerides. That's a component of your blood cholesterol, and very high triglycerides can be very dangerous. They can make you more likely to have a heart attack. So you don't want to eat too much steak and have that excess energy stored as the triglycerides, because that gets stored in your arteries near your heart. All right. So what needs to happen to storage molecules before they can be used for energy? So these storage molecules come from fatty acids, monosaccharides, and amino acids being built up after we've eaten them, right? So we've digested now fats that we've eaten, carbohydrates that we've eaten, proteins that we've eaten, but the body can't use them right here in this moment. So they are stored somewhere in the body to be used at a later time. Glycogen is stored in the liver and in the muscles, and triglycerides are stored in the fat cells in the body, as well as, like I mentioned, in the vascular system near the heart. So these storage molecules are stored in the body, and then they are now large molecules. They need to be broken down before the energy stored inside those molecules can be used by the body. So cells use nutrients in two main ways: to get energy immediately using cellular respiration, and to build and store larger molecules, which may be used for energy later. All right, so this part, I think we're done with. It goes through the more complex, higher level illustration of cellular respiration, which you might use in AP biology. But it is important to see here that this is a very complex process, and we're just talking about it on sort of a high level summary basis. But this process is key to life. All right. Now, let's do the extension. Some athletes do carb loading several days before a major endurance event, such as running a marathon. This involves eating a lot of complex carbohydrates, such as starch, which is found in pasta, bread, and rice. Carb loading also involves decreasing physical activity so that those molecules get stored instead of used. So, explain how carb loading might allow cells to produce more ATP during a marathon. It has to do with those storage molecules we were just talking about. So, by carb loading before a marathon, a runner can increase their glycogen storage, which can then be broken down during the race to make ATP, so that the glucose is just ready. It's stored there in the glycogen, ready as you're running, as your blood glucose drops because you're running and you're using all of that energy. The glycogen stores can be broken down, and all of that glucose is released into the blood, and you are ready and raring to go for round two. You've got your second wind. Some marathon runners eat energy gels during a marathon. So they keep that in their pocket, almost like a piece of candy, but it's an energy gel. And what is in that energy gel? Almost nothing but pure sugar. So, based on the food label, what is the main energy source in energy gels? Carbohydrates, 25 grams of sugar. So, why would you eat pure sugar in the middle of a race? Well, a runner eating an energy gel is getting a quick burst of simple sugars, which can be used to make ATP after being quickly and easily absorbed into the bloodstream, right at the mouth, because those molecules are so small they can go right into the bloodstream. Runners who do not eat energy gels rely on their stored energy molecules that must be broken down before they can be used to produce ATP. So you have to use some energy to break them down, and then it takes a little bit longer for that energy to be available, and you might deplete your stores before the end of the race. If you're adding in the energy from the energy gels, you're getting that quick burst right away that doesn't deplete any of your stored glycogen in order for you to use it. So, our final question here: during the race, the runner's breathing and heart rates will increase. So, why is that? As you run, your muscles are using energy in the form of ATP, which requires glucose and oxygen to be produced via cellular respiration. While running, more and more oxygen and glucose need to be supplied to the cells. As a result, the heart rate and breathing rates increase to supply blood more quickly to the cells. There we are. And that is all she wrote. So if you need me to go slower, you can go back, obviously, pause the video, watch it again. If you have any additional questions, send me an email, ask me in class. But I hope you guys feel confident now that you can get that done, hand it in, and hand in those biochemistry digital flashcards as well. Have a great weekend. Bye, guys.